Students, you're welcome to today's program. Our subject for today will be on basic technology, and the class will be GSS2 third term. The topic for today's lesson will be belt and chain drives. Before we talk of belt and chain drives, let's look at specific objectives. At the end of this lesson, JSS2 students should be able to 1. Describe belt and chain drives. 2. Explain the principles of belt and chain drives. 3. State the advantages of belt and chain drives. 4. State the disadvantages of belt and chain drive. To proceed further, let's look at the definition of belt and chain drive. The belt and chain drive are used for transmitting mechanical power from one point to another. It works on the principle of transfer of power from one rotating shaft to another shaft through a pulley. This process is used to convey power to the wheels of a machine as the chain or belt is passed over a gear sprocket, with the teeth of the gear or sprocket meshing with the hole in the links of the chain. From this definition, we now see that for us to transmit power from one source to another, there must be a means, and one of these means is by using the belt and chain drives. And how do we connect the belt and chain drive? The belt and chain drives, we see from this definition, passes through the groove of the pulley. And in that process, as it passes through the groove, we are able to get some friction as it slides into that groove. And we now see that this process is used to convey the power to the wheels of a machine also. In case of the machine, as been explained here, the machine has what we call gear sprocket. And we now see that the gear sprocket has teeth. And for us to use the chain drive to transmit energy in the gear sprockets, we now the chain has to mesh with the holes in the gear sprocket and then has to link with the chain. The next thing we are going to consider in this topic is types of belt and chain drive. There are three. The various types of belt and chain drives include 1. Smooth belt, 2. Toothed belts, 3. Chain belts. We see that in number 1 and 2, both of them are belts, but number 2 is made up of tooths, and that is why we call it toothed belt. It's made up of a sort of hook that can hook on that pulley, and that is what we call toothed belt. Then the other one is the chain drive belt, which uses chain. I haven't considered the various types of belt and chain drive. Let's look at the factors to consider in selecting belt and chain drives. What are the factors to consider? Number 1 factor, the cost of the belt and the chain drives. Number 1 factor is the cost of the belt and the chain drives. Why do we have to talk of this? We see that in trying to select the belt or chain to use, or in trying to take which of them, we have to consider the cost. We now see that the chain drive is more costlier than the belt. Therefore, it depends on which one you can be able to afford. Then the next one, which is number 2 factor, is power to be transmitted. We now also see that the power to be transmitted in this process is very important. For example, you see that if you need a higher transmission of power, and therefore the belt and the chain which is being used to transmit this power reduces this power, you now see that a loss of power is being wasted. So therefore, we see that you have to think of the power in which the belt and the chain has to transmit. The next one is power loss in delivering. Yeah, this is also very important. For what is this trying to explain to us? This tries to explain to us that at times in the process of transferring the power, the mechanical energy to the other to the other source, there may be a power loss due to one thing or the other. Maybe the belt you use is old, or one thing or the other might just happen. So we now see that power loss is also very important. We should consider the power loss in the process of transmission. The next one is the weight of belt and chain drive. Yes, the weight of the belt and chain is very, very important. We know that the chain belt is more heavier than the other belt. So the weight in which you use for the transmission of this energy is also very important. The other one is resistance to wear and tear. We see that the smooth belts and the toothed belts, more often the toothed belts can wear faster than the chain belt. So resistance to wear and tear is very important to consider. For you know that in the process of, as a result of constant use of the belts, there may be wear and tear in one way or the other. So resistance to wear and tear is very important. Number 6, long service and reliability. The chain belts has the ability to last longer and more reliable than the smooth and toothed belt. Therefore, in considering one of the factors to select belt or chain drives, you have to look at the service, the long service and reliability. The next one, number 7, is the space for belt on chain drive. We now see that the belt drive is more wider and therefore occupies more space. And we see that this space enhances more friction for the belt drive, unlike the chain drives that is more narrower. So space for belt or chain drive is also important. Having considered the factors in selection of belt and chain drives, the next thing we are going to consider is principles of belt and chain drives. The belt and chain drives helps to transfer power and energy to engines, rotational bodies, and cause them to move or rotate. The belt and chain drives is attached to sprocket or gear, which rotates while functioning. The gear can be outside or inside the machine. Example, the timing chain inside the automobile combustion engine, which drives the crankshaft. Yes, if we look at these principles of operation, we now see that one of the important things in the principles of the belt and chain drives is that it helps to transfer power and energy to another engine. Remember that in the process of the principles of belt and chain drive, that the two sources may be distance apart. So for you to be able to move the other source, the other pulley, from the major source, from where the power is coming from, you have to use either the belt or the chain drive. He said the belt and chain drive is attached to a sprocket or gear which rotates while functioning. This applies when you use the chain drive. For example, when you use the chain drive can only be attached to one of the mechanisms, one of the gears that has a sprocket or gear. And once you attach the chain drives to this sprocket or gear, it hooks to it and therefore can function effectively. The gear can be outside or inside the machine. Yes, this linkage can be outside or inside. Example, the timing chain inside the automobile combustion engine which drives the crankshaft. That implies that it must not be outside. At times we see that these mechanisms or these principles of belt and chain drive can also function while it is inside the system. The next thing we are going to consider on belt and chain drive is the uses of belt and chain drives. Belt and chain drives are widely used in the following areas. Number 1, industrial machines. The industries make use of belt and chain drive to be able to carry most of their work effectively. For example, we see that most of the linkages can be possible when the major source is being linked to other sources with the belt or the chain drive. Therefore, it can now help them to power so many sources at the same time. Another use of belt and chain drive is in the agricultural machines. We have so many agricultural machines, and we know that these machines are attached with so many other equipment, like some of the like the tractors, the harvesters, and most of these machines. They make use of the belt and chain drives in the process of carrying out their work. The next one is the diesel and petrol engines. That is number 3. Yes, the diesel and petrol engines make use of the belt and chain drive. And how does this apply? We now know that in the diesel or petrol engine, that the major source of the energy comes from the crankshaft. And we still have other components that needs energy to operate in the engine. What happens is that we have to link up the belts and the chain drives to these other sources, like the ignition coil that has to provide light for the vehicles, like the circulation of water, the power pumps in the vehicles, and other systems that might need to be powered. Therefore, the major source, which is the crankshaft, is now linked to all these other sources so that they will effectively be powered to carry out the functions in the vehicles. Another use of belt and chain drives is in the conveyor belts in mining operations. We see that the conveyor belts helps in transferring things from one source to the other, and we now see that in the manufacturing operations, most of these things are being carried out with the use of the belt and chain, the belt drive. The next one is the motor vehicle. Yes, like we've already said, in the motor vehicle we have the diesel and the petrol engines and other things that needs to be moved. Like we have things like the shafts in the wheel shaft and other things that have to be moved. So we now see that in most cases, some of these things can only be carried out when there is a linkage from the source. And this linkage has to be possible when we use either the belt or the chain drive. Then the next one is the sewing machines. The sewing machines are the common things which we see in our homes that make use of some of these belt or chain drives in the linkage in order to move things in their order. Another thing we have to look at is advantages of belt drives. The advantages of belt drive include 1. Good for conveyor belt. Yes, like we've already said, the belt is good for us to use it to convert things from one source to the other. Number 2, the belt drives can easily replace when worn out. Yes, the belt drives can easily be replaced when worn out. 2, toothed belts designed to operate at constant pitch radius. Yes, one of the advantages of the belt drive is that the toothed belts has some pitch which is at constant radius. So we now see that if this belt is being used, we see that some of the operations could be carried out at their constant pitch radius. Then the next advantage of the belt drive is that the toothed belts are used for non-sporting machines. They are used for non-sporting machines. Having seen the advantages of belt drives, let's look at the disadvantages of belt drive. Disadvantages of belt drive include 1. Belt drives can slip out of gear. We now see that the belt drive, looking from where it is being hooked at the pulleys, we see that the belt drive has a wider width, and we see that the wider it is, the easier for it to grip. Therefore, friction is very important in the belt drive. And we now see that when friction is not enough, when the friction required to grip is not enough, it is easier for the belt drive to slip out of the gear. So one of the advantages of the belt drive include that belt drives can slip out of gear. 2. The teeth for toothed belt wear faster. The teeth for toothed belt wear faster. Looking at the materials which the belt drive is made up of. It is made up of things that are not metal, and we now see that as a result of the material of the toothed belt, we see that it can wear out faster. Number 3, belt drives are bold and difficult to shift to various gears. Yes, we say that they are bold, they are wider, therefore it is difficult to shift to various gears. Number 4, belt gears cannot be used to move objects vertically. It cannot be used to move objects vertically. The belt drives cannot be used to move objects vertically. Number 5, belt drives does not last long when compared to the chain drives, and this is because of the material. The chain drive is made up of metal, while the belt drive is not made up of metal. So therefore, the belt drive does not last long when compared to the chain drive. Having seen the advantages and disadvantages of the belt drive, let's look at the advantages of chain drives. The advantages of chain drives include: 1, efficient mode of transmitting power. We see that the chain drive has more efficiency when it comes to transmission of power. 2, the chain drives stronger and last longer than the belt drive. Yes, the chain drive, due to the material which it is made up of, metal mostly, we say that it lasts longer than the belt drives. 3, the chain drives can rotate at faster speed. This we can see in most of our automobiles or engines. When we require or when we need faster speed, when we need more higher work to do, you now see that we make more use of the chains, because the chain can withstand more stress, and we now see that it is efficient in transmitting more power. So we now see that the chain drives can rotate at a faster speed, therefore more efficient to do more work. Number 4, the chain drives can move objects vertically. We now see in most of the loaders, in some of these bottling companies, we see that some of the loaders used in loading the bottles and other things, the cranes being used in that place, you see that the movement of those lifters, the application of the chain drive is being used to move them vertically. Having seen advantages of chain drives, let's look at the disadvantages of chain drive. 1, the chain drive is difficult to replace when worn out. The chain drive is difficult to replace when worn out. We see that being metal, when once it is worn out, there is nothing you can do. The best thing is to dispose of it. If not so, you will not be getting an efficient means of transmission. Number 2, the chain drives, they are made of metallic materials which cause vibration. Yes, we know that metals can make more noise. They can produce more noise. Therefore, they cause more vibration compared to the belt drive. Number 3, chain drives require lubricant to reduce friction. Yes, the metals, we know, make more noise. And when we come to those areas or those components of the metals that has contact or maybe make friction with one another, in order to reduce those frictions, we have to add lubricants like oils, grease, to reduce the friction. Therefore, we say that one of the disadvantages of the chain drives is that it requires lubricants to reduce friction. Summary: belt and chain drives are used to transmit power from one source to another. 2, the use of belt and chain drives for power transmission is based on certain factors as we've earlier stated. And some of these factors, as we stated earlier, is the cost of the belt and chain, smoothness of the belts and chain, the space for the belt, the weight of the belt or chain, the noise constraints, power to be transferred, long service reliabilities, and others. So we see that the use of belt and chain drives for power transmission is based on certain factors. Number 3, summary. Belts are either smooth, that rely on friction with a pulley wheel, or toothed and driven by a sprocket. Evaluation. 1. Describe belts and chain drives. 2. List 4 machines that can use belt and chain drives. 3. State 5 factors to consider in choosing belt or chain drives. 4. Mention 4 advantages and disadvantages of belt drives. 5. List 3 advantages and disadvantages of the chain drives.